We are live. Let's try to make your week 12 not be a turkey, maybe be delicious like turkey gumbo. We've got Chris Allen here who's going to help me with the start sit questions and Dr. Jene Bramel. And let's dive right in, Doc. Aaron Jones. And this is one where, again, there's a fantasy angle to it, trying to gauge the values of each of these players against the Rams. It is an afternoon start. The Packers do have a bye next week. What do we do with Aaron Jones? And by implication, we can talk about A.J. Dillon later.
Yeah, I think we're stuck waiting at least a little bit from what Adam Schefter and folks have said overnight. The Packers may not make this decision. We may not know about what the decision is until closer to game time. So that's a little bit unfortunate. So hopefully we've got some players later in the afternoon that you can wait on to if you need to. But I'm still leaning towards Jones not playing. I think, we know that the Packers medical and training staff tends to lean on the conservative side. Seen that with Aaron Rodgers. We've seen it with Aaron Jones. We've seen it with Devontae Evans. We've seen, Adams, lots of players over the years on the defensive side of the ball as well, wherein if there's a chance that a player is likely to be significantly more healthy the following week or still at risk of injury in the current week, they're less likely to clear him for contact and to play. And I think, with the bye week next week, getting 2 weeks instead of one is probably going to be meaningful. You could also read that as saying, well, if he's a little bit sore, he's got 2 weeks to recover afterwards. But limited practices only. Matt LaFleur saying that the team was going to be smart and not risk the future of the season to push him a little bit sooner. That bye week being there. And then you mentioned A.J. Dillon. A.J. Dillon is capable and comfortable and well able to take care of anything in the playbook that's necessary. So I just don't know that it makes a ton of sense, knowing what we know of Green Bay, to expect that Jones plays. However, if he does, that tells you that he's probably going to get 10 to 15 touches, if not a little bit more than that. So I think for that reason, knowing Jones can be as productive as he can be in those snaps, that maybe you wait a little bit, but if you've got any sort of option in the top 25 and the front half of the day, I think you probably have to use them, because I think they're telling us without telling us that he's not fully recovered yet, and we know what Green Bay does with players like that. So I don't expect him to play, but we'll see if we're surprised later in the afternoon.
Gene, is there something going on in the water out in East Rutherford, New Jersey? I mean, we've got every single skill position player injured for the Giants as of right now. Kadarius Toney, he came. I don't even remember Toney going out of the game with an injury, but he leaves and now comes up questionable, now doubtful for today. I'm not thinking you believe that he's going to start, but Sterling Shepard also out. Saquon Barkley nursing an injury. Even Kyle Rudolph nursing injury as well. I mean, with all of these players injured for the Giants today, should we expect any of them? And what are your expectations for? I guess Sig and I can talk about the offense, but what about the injured guys for New York?
I think Barkley's going to play, and there's been mixed reports this week. Barkley said it's a nagging injury, something that he's going to have to continue to play through. There were some reports overnight that I don't remember who they were from, whether it was Pelissero or Rappaport or Schefter, that said Barkley felt like he was getting closer to full strength. I don't know if that's the case. Some of that might have been the turf last week. Some of it was probably related to the ankle and knee issues that he's still struggling with. Just didn't have the footing that you've seen him before, didn't have the explosiveness that we'd seen from him before. Hopefully that turns out to be a turf issue rather than an injury type situation. But he's going to play, and I think, given what the Giants have on their depth chart and now what's going on with their passing offense, you're going to see Barkley get 15 to 20 plus touches if he can. Shepard's not going to go. It's rare anymore. I think the reason teams list players doubtful is to give them the slimmest of chances to upgrade them to questionable through the weekend. But we've not seen that happen. It's way more likely the players are declared out. That didn't happen with Toney, but he was only on the rehab field all week alongside Sterling Shepard, and I don't expect either one of them to go.
Gene, our hero, has a chance to return. One Cordarrelle Patterson. This one was weird from the beginning, right? It was a Thursday. He had a chance to play. He didn't play, so that made it seem like, well, of course he's going to play this week. Well, it's not. Of course he's going to play this week. What can we nail down, if anything, about Cordarrelle today?
I think there's a good chance that he'll play. He's had 2 full weeks of limited practice, and last week, that may have been mostly conditioning related. I think they knew probably from the get-go that he wasn't going to be able to turn around on that short week and play on Thursday's game. But for him to be limited in practice all week and go through drills rather than for the team to prioritize rehab and reconditioning on a side field or something like that, treatment over practice tells you that they think he was close. Most of the news overnight is reasonable, still being called a game time decision, but all the trends suggest that he's going to be able to go. How many touches he's going to get, how long can he go, what's the risk of aggravation are more important questions for today. I think probable more than doubtful for sure. I think it's reasonable to suspect that he can get 10 touches or more in some form or fashion, but there is going to be a risk of aggravation because we're still being told that he's a game time decision. So that tells you that he's not fully recovered yet, but I think he's probably close enough to play. There's some risk in using him in fantasy lineups this week, but you can expect him to be active, I think.
So, like with Kadarius Toney, we didn't really see him getting injured, but he winds up missing this week. Same thing with Marquise Brown. Didn't really hear anything about him leaving the game prior to him missing last week. Winds up practicing most of this week. What are your expectations for Marquise today?
I don't know. I think he's probably going to see fewer snaps than usual. I think you'll probably see him in the 50 to 65% of the offensive snaps range and maybe 4 to 6 targets as a ceiling. If those targets come downfield and he's successful, then the ceiling expectation is still in play. But, we've had beat writers imply that this is a hamstring situation rather than something else going on in the thigh. But we've seen the Ravens allow players to play through that. Brown, towards the end of his soft tissue strains, has tended to play pretty well. Adam Schefter said nothing other than is expected to play overnight, which I think all are good signs. But I don't think we can expect him to get double-digit targets. I don't really know, whether or not I wouldn't necessarily put him in the decoy role, but if he's going to run the vertical routes or the underneath routes, and he's not successful enough or healthy enough to get penetration, then that could be, decoy by default type situation. But I don't see any expectation right now that he won't be able to go tonight. So I think, if you're looking for that sort of option in your lineups, I think he's safe to leave there. You might want to have a hedge in place just in case, but I think he's way more probable than doubtful.
All right, Gene, another weird one. Elijah Mitchell, he is expected to play, but he was mostly using one hand in practice. He can carry the ball, but maybe he can't catch the ball or pass block. This is, again, it was kind of strange whenever Kyle Shanahan insisted that he was going to play, even though you knew and everybody who listened to you knew he wasn't going to play last week. Does that inform at all how we project usage, knowing that he's going to play this week?
A little bit. I think what it tells us is that maybe he was a little bit closer to playing last week than we thought, but they just weren't sure they could protect the fresh surgical repair just 6 days later. And that was, as you said, not unexpected at all. This week, they said pretty early on that, they were again optimistic about him, but we wanted to see what happened in practice. So for him to be able to go through consecutive practices all week is pretty reassuring. And then Shanahan pretty specifically saying, we think we can protect the surgical repair. It's just going to come down to a matter of comfort for him more than anything else. So I think, getting the go ahead overnight and hearing what we've heard that he's going to play, my speculation this morning is that you probably see him take the bulk of the running back touches. Now in Shanahan land, that might be just 51% of the running back touches, but I don't know that they're going to put him in a position to pass protect or catch the ball routinely out of the backfield. So there's going to be some sort of split, but I think this is meaningful in the sense that Mitchell is going to cut more into Jeff Wilson's usage than Wilson is necessarily going to cut into Mitchell's usage.
So, Gene, one more for you. Looking ahead, Antonio Brown, not going to play this week, but it's sounding like Bruce Arians is a bit more optimistic about the heel, foot, ankle thing that he's been dealing with for the past, essentially the month or so. Should we expect him back like next week? Or even if he's back next week, should be one of those processes where shouldn't expect a ton out of him in his first week back, and then maybe once we get into week 14, where we see him back to full strength?
I'm sorry, who was that? I missed that.
Antonio Brown.
A little bit. Okay, good. Yes. When you said heel, I got confused a little bit there, which is not unusual for me at all. No, I think what's surprising about this is we're now hearing that it was a 5 to 6 week injury all along and that they didn't use injured reserve, which is to look at the video over the last month or so. That's exactly what it looked like. So it's a little bit odd there that's how things have gone down in Tampa Bay. But yeah, I think things are trending in that direction. He needs to be back on the practice field, and we need to hear something optimistic from Bruce Arians before we can assume that he's going to be back in any sort of meaningful role. But I think at this point, we're very likely to get into when we get to the fantasy playoff time, that Antonio Brown's going to be healthy, assuming he doesn't have any setbacks along the way. This is the type of injury that causes some stiffness and some changes in how players move. So we may not see the Antonio Brown of weeks 2, 3, and 4 in your fantasy playoffs, but I think he's going to open up the Tampa Bay offense in a way that's going to be pretty reassuring.
Judy's just going to show up for every single show now. She's the most reclusive cat. There she is. She's the most reclusive guy. I know, right? Like she's gonna overtake Football Guys. She's gonna become the most popular thing about Football Guys live streams. They're just gonna say, when is the cat gonna show up?
Right.
It's just amazing to me because to everybody else in the world, she's an urban legend. She never shows her face, but to the world, she'll do that. Gene, what is the world gonna do with Kareem Hunt today? He's back, but is he back in our lineups?
Yeah, that's a difficult question. So Alex Van Pelt said essentially the Browns are not going to have any qualms about putting Hunt back into his previous role, and that being third down back, and spelling Nick Chubb whenever is necessary. But I don't know that you're going to see him spell Nick Chubb that much. So on Wednesday, this was really the first day they designated him to return. This week was. On Wednesday, Hunt was pretty optimistic, but said, I just need to see how I feel. And it was really great to see him go from that, a little bit of a hedge on Wednesday to everybody saying we're full go on Friday. But I don't know that you're going to get 25 to 40 snaps, which is what Hunt was usually playing before the injury, and 10 to 15 touches. It's possible, depending on how many offensive snaps that Cleveland runs today. But I think it's much more reasonable to expect them to work him back in a little bit, kind of somewhere in that 7 to 15 range, but 8 to 10 is probably the sweet spot. Just don't think the conditioning is going to be there yet where they're going to trust him to do much more than that. And again, Nick Chubb is a heck of a player, and Dearness Johnson has been playing well. So I don't know that they need to put Hunt fully back in that role until they're certain that he's in game condition. So next week, yes, but even though Alex Van Pelt said that, I would not expect him to get 15 touches today.
So with Washington's football team dealing with a ton of injuries, Logan Thomas, should we expect him back? Has he been activated off of IR? I didn't think so.
No, that won't happen until Monday, though. On the Monday night, teams do not have to make roster decisions until Monday afternoon.
At best, do you think he's going to be activated and be back on Monday night?
Yeah, I think the tone of Ron Rivera and the folks around Washington suggests that he's going to be able to go. And we didn't hear anything this week about the soreness that he had back in week 10. This week's of practice seemed to have gone very smoothly. He looked comfortable in the practice video that we saw. Again, it's hard to get a great read from those things, but he wasn't clearly limping. His body language looked good. There's something that can be said and read into that, I feel like, anyway. And I think he's going to play. Now, Curtis Samuel is probably going to be on a snap count. There's lots of stuff swirling around him. He just needs to prove that he's in condition and ready to go. Rivera kind of said the same thing about Thomas. He put both Samuel and Thomas in the same category where we might want to limit them a little bit. But the state of the depth chart at tight end, the state of the wide receiver position in Washington suggests that even if Thomas doesn't go 85% of the snaps, and he probably won't, he's still got a good chance to see his usual number of targets. So I think it's reasonable to expect that he can get 4 to 6 targets, maybe even a little bit more than that, even if they limit his snap count a little bit. So I think it's reasonable to put him in lineups right away, tight end position being what it is, and not worry about what might happen between now and Monday night.
Okay, last round of questions, Gene. Well, first, really quick, because it doesn't have to do with lineup setting today. A.J. Brown going on IR with a chest injury. Is this like a torn pec?
No, I don't think so. I think what I wrote last week is it was what I saw made me nervous about the joint between the sternum and the collarbone. And it was eerily silent from Tennessee. Not that teams put a lot of information out there, but the national media didn't have anything to say. Local media didn't have anything to say. And it didn't really even come up during practice this week. The last thing we heard was that the x-rays were negative. Well, that doesn't mean a lot. Rib cartilage injuries can be a problem. Joint injuries, especially that SC joint, can be a problem. And I don't know that that's what it is, but it had the feel of something that was going to be a multiple week injury. I didn't specifically speculate on injured reserve on Monday, but this was something that had me concerned for a multiple week injury from the beginning. Ian Rappaport yesterday said that this isn't supposed to be a season-ending situation with fits with a couple of those possible diagnoses that we talked about. He's a player that, again, you're hoping to get healthy and capable of full usage by the time your playoffs get around.
Okay, so my real final question, and I was gonna show everybody my feet this week. But instead, I'm just going to ask you, should we read anything into Aaron Rodgers and his episode of showing us his foot?
Mama always said, if you ain't got anything nice to say, we're gonna keep this going, I guess. If it's his pinky toe, I'm going to argue that a pinky toe fracture is probably not as big a deal as some turf toe injuries. He
Right.
threw for 380 yards and 4 touchdowns and scrambled twice for 21 yards. I don't doubt that he was more sore after doing that last week. And I think it's very reasonable for them to limit his practice participation. But I don't think there's too much here. And then with the bye week coming, he should be fine going forward.
Last one, Dr. Gene, with Damian Harris. I see neck injury. I think about Chris Carson. Same mechanism, something completely different, or what are your expectations for him?
I'm not aware that Damian Harris has a chronic issue like Carson did. And I don't know that many of us were aware that Carson had a chronic issue either. I mean, that's what was said when there were first issues in the beginning of the year with Chris Carson. But I don't think that that's the case with Damian Harris. What I'm wondering is, a couple of weeks ago, he missed a game with a concussion. And a lot of times those mechanisms of injury can cause some neck sprain and neck stiffness as well. Was able to play last week without too much difficulty. I don't think this is going to be a long-term concern in the same way that Carson's injury was. I don't think this is probably a spine type situation as much as it is a soft tissue situation. Not to say that those are less important, but they're easier to play through. So I think that the bigger issue with New England is, as it's always been, they played 4 running backs between 27 and 37% of the snaps last week. They were, everybody had right around 22, 25 snaps. So trying to predict which one of those 4 players is ready to play and who has the hot hand and so on and so forth is going to be the bigger question. But everything I've seen suggests that all of the New England players, from Hunter Henry to Jonnu Smith to Ramondre Stevenson to Damian Harris, are going to be active. What sort of rotational roles they have is yet to be determined.
What is always determined, what I predict every week, Dr. Gene is always ready to play, ready to give us everything we need to cut through all the BS out there about injuries and navigate your lineup in week 12 and beyond. Doc, we appreciate you.
Yeah, I think I'm going to have to plan some turkey gumbo now. That sounded good.
Yeah,
that does sound
look
really
at the
good,
recipe. The Trinity.
Come on.
Learn the Trinity. Love the Trinity. Yes, everybody. All right, let me get that back to our good overlay here. Bing.
Slide it to the, here we go.
Right, slide, slippity slide. And let's see who we're going to help people slide into their lineups. And it's funny, Chris, when Gene said, well, if you have a top 25 running back option to play over Aaron Jones, and I thought, has he looked at the top 25 running backs this week?
It's
because it ain't great. It ain't
Yeah.
great. Even looking at wide receivers. I mean, it's interesting. This year really has been a war of attrition in the sense that your trust level in players, it's just eroding week after week after week. We didn't even ask him about Ezekiel Elliott. There'll be plenty of time for that next week. Of course, we'll be back next Thursday night. Let's jump in. And a lot of these questions are really going to revolve around these running backs. And this is one just so we can touch on somebody, lunch table legend. I love it when people get in before the start time to give us your questions. We love that. Rex Burkhead or DJ Dallas? Really, I mean, I think I know what my answer is going to be, but how interesting is DJ Dallas, and by implication, how uninteresting or interesting is Alex Collins tomorrow night against Washington?
I mean, I guess it's just really how interesting is the Seattle's offense at this point.
Not very.
And with Tyrod Taylor, like with most of the touchdowns, like really going like through Tyrod Taylor, like mostly through his legs, not really anything through the air. I guess like Rex Burkhead would be interesting, especially given like today's matchup. I mean, they have one of like the softest matchups against the Jets as possible. So if you think that there's a chance that Rex Burkhead could be a part of the passing game, which he has traditionally, also has a chance to, catch maybe fall into the end zone if they wind up getting into scoring position, given, Zach Wilson's turnover prone ways like throughout most of the earlier parts of this season. At the very least, Houston's offense, while it might sound odd to say it, like at least that provides a little bit more intrigue, where with Seattle, we don't know what to expect. It's just more, it's more depressing than anything else, just given the history of Russell Wilson and the Seahawks and all that. So to be quite honest, I'd rather lean towards Rex Burkhead today.
Yeah, well, and I think that there's a lot of good Rex Burkhead. Like you said, if he could just get some receptions out of the backfield, then we might be cooking here. Cooking on my mind now because gumbo. This game, though, with the exception of Elijah Moore, is kind of like dumpster diving for your lineup. Maybe the defense is going to work out. And then actually he came back in and added Dante Foreman. Now I'll ask you about this. Dante Foreman, and I said sure, Foreman, because there was a report this morning that I think it was Ian Rappaport saying that the Titans are going to try to lean on Dante Foreman today. Now, that being said, I mean, there's a lot of things we want to do. There's what we actually can do, because Tennessee, we've seen they lost to the Jets and the Jets and the Texans when their offenses have been this weak. So Foreman, less depressing.
I don't think so, especially going up against the Patriots. I mean, we always think about going up against Bill Belichick. He's going to take away the thing that you do best.
Right. What if he can't do anything?
Yeah, right. I mean, they certainly can't pass. So if we think about leaning on their running game as being their quote unquote strength at this point in the season, then I would think that he would just continue to load the boxes and ask Ryan Tannehill to beat him with who they got right now. What, Des Fitzpatrick, Nick Westbrook-Ikhine?
Nick Westbrook-Ikhine. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Chester Rogers.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, how can you really
Anthony Ferguson?
Yes, I mean, imagine having to go into Foxborough and having to, and this is what you're trotting out from a passing perspective. So I think that's really my pessimism towards Donta Foreman is that this is already a Patriots defense that's essentially bottled up a number of running games so far, like minus Cleveland's. But other than that, I mean, they can really smother opposing offenses. And so if that's one of the only things that you could possibly do well in that game, I don't have much optimism for Donta Foreman today.
No, not much optimism for Tennessee. But wouldn't it just be 2021 NFL for Tennessee to put 40 points up on them somehow?
Oh, and Donta Foreman will get like a 60-yard touchdown on like the second play.
Right. Going back to Seattle really quick, there was a question was basically Stafford or Wilson. And I guess really that's a temperature check on just how much, Jake Wirtz asked it, just how much faith have we lost in Wilson? Because Stafford is coming in, honestly, just as cold as Wilson as far as his levels of play. He's facing Green Bay. He has some cold weather experience, even though he was playing indoors in Detroit. Wilson playing on the road tomorrow night at Washington.
Yeah, I would lean more towards Stafford here. I think with Stafford coming in cold, I mean, you can talk yourself into they've had the bye week to kind of fix whatever, I guess, mix-ups they might have had before they entered into the bye, had a little bit more time to integrate Odell Beckham into the offense, a little bit more time for everybody to get healthy. So maybe we might not see somebody like Darrell Henderson trotting off to the sidelines into the medical tent like every other drive, that sort of thing. So the continuity factor might be more part of the LA Rams. And also compared to Stafford to Wilson, while Wilson has, like, most of his game has been predicated on those explosive plays, and we just haven't seen that. I mean, the Seahawks, their pass rate over expectation has been below league average, especially now with Pete Carroll insisting they want to run the ball. With the Rams, it's been the exact opposite. They've been top 5, top 6 in pass rate over expectation throughout the entire season. So I think with Stafford, I think we can give him the benefit of the doubt, given the way that they started over like a larger chunk of the season. Whereas the Seahawks, after Russell Wilson came back, even before the injury, things were kind of teetering on. I don't know how this is going to go. And after he came back, the last 2 games, things have been completely off the rails. So it's harder for me to trust Wilson at this point. I'd rather go with Stafford.
Yeah, and like you said, that also casts a shadow on Dallas and Collins. You do like Dallas. I mean, if you are a momentum person, then maybe DJ Dallas is an interesting play simply because he got in on one drive and scored a touchdown last week and looked good. He looked like, unlike some other parts of the offense, he looked like he wanted to play football, and he could get more opportunity with Alex Collins. I think they want to use him as cannon fodder, grind up some of those carries. DJ Dallas Dallas could be a little more interesting, especially as a receiver out of the backfield. And I think you're going to continue to play Lockett, Metcalf. It just feels weird to put DK Metcalf on the bench, and Gerald Everett's coming on, but we just have no faith in Wilson right now. Because of what you said, what's happening now, what has happened in the past. He needs to show us something. This is that classic. There needs to be a good term on this. I call it fantasy probation. You're on the bench until you show us something. You make us regret putting you on the bench.
Right.
I think that's where we are with Russell Wilson, and I think it could get pretty crazy too. I could see starting, like, for instance, both sides of that Cam Newton to a Tagovailoa. I'm going to start both of those guys over Russell Wilson. I mean, really, I just want a quarterback to give me a reason to start over Russell. Even, Kirk Cousins, maybe even Jimmy Garoppolo, because that could be the highest scoring matchup of the day.
Right.
So I'm just trying to probe the depths of that lack of Russell Wilson confidence. And it sounds like you're willing to go deep down into that cavern with me.
Oh yeah, because it's just what are our expectations at this point? I mean, forget about what you think about that game, given how either of those quarterbacks have played, and even if you want to extend it into the Cam Tua matchup as well, think about how any of those quarterbacks have played, and Tua has shown that he has a ceiling, whether it be
Right.
he's rushed a couple of like thrown a couple of touchdowns, like without even throwing to his top two receivers, at least the top two that they're paying at this point. But I mean, same thing with Cam. Immediately came in and gave the Panthers offense a spark. I mean, all of those other quarterbacks that we've mentioned we've already seen those ceilings. We've already seen those highs from them. We just haven't seen it from Russ yet. We haven't seen it from Russ in almost like 6 weeks, almost been like 2
Right.
months. So it's
Right.
like it's hard for me to even have any sort of expectation, let alone trying to think about any of his game for today from an objective projections type of standpoint.
Yeah, it's rough. Now you're an engineer, Chris. So I know that you probably have gotten into some large equations like on the whiteboard where you've got different sections and variables that hinge on other variables, just trying to map this out. Matthew Wells question. Damian Harris versus Tennessee, or wait for Aaron Jones / Elijah Mitchell call. Of course, they're both playing late games. So again, like you could spin off and say, well, if Aaron Jones is going to play, that adds this. If Elijah Mitchell is going to play, but we think his role is going to be larger, it's this. But Dr. Gene laid out a lot of this as far as the medical side of it. Let's give a fantasy thumbs up, thumbs down for this one for Matthew Wells.
I mean, Aaron Jones, like based off of Dr. Gene's comments, I would probably set him aside.
I agree.
All 3 of those guys. I mean, even coming into this week, seeing him coming back to practice, that's great. I mean, they didn't put him on short-term IR. That was another good sign that he at least had a chance to be back in a relatively short time frame. But with them being up against that bye, having a shot, already looking like they have at least are in position for a playoff spot, no need for them to rush him back at this point. I'm looking at this as more of an AJ Dillon flop lag type of situation where we got the opportunity last week, didn't get the production. We might see that from AJ Dillon this week. They don't really need to rush Aaron Jones back. Elijah Mitchell, and then Dr. Gene had some comments on him too. It sounded like, and this might have been gamesmanship from Kyle Shanahan, but it sounded like he was at least hoping that Mitchell could go last week. So now if we're also seeing a bunch of limited practices from Mitchell this week, no at least report of a setback from what I'm hearing, we already know what Mitchell's ceiling could be. I mean, Mitchell has shown he has a higher ceiling than Damian Harris. So even if you want to look at it from that sort of strategic perspective, who gives you the higher ceiling between the two of them? And also who has the higher floor? Because given the workload that Ramondre Stevenson has now carved out in the Patriots backfield, I would definitely lean more towards Elijah Mitchell, with Jeff Wilson getting the opportunity, but hasn't been at least nearly as efficient as a runner as Mitchell has. So I would lean more towards Eli Mitchell and waiting for that sort of potential ceiling out of the 3 of those guys.
Yeah, I think it's a coin flip. Harris probably has the best chance to score a touchdown. Probably. But Mitchell has the better chance of a ceiling game. And to like ceiling, I probably would lean there too. The other side of that, and then we're going to bring enter stage left Ty Johnson as we get into these running back questions. David Meyer says, Ramondre Stevenson. And remember, Stevenson and Harris both coming in on injury report also. Ty Johnson not on the injury report unless you count being in the Jets offense, like, questionable Jets offense with Zach Wilson. Stevenson or Ty Johnson?
I lean towards Ty Johnson, at least in this one. And that one's close for me. That's just because Ty Johnson, we've seen him have the speed. We've also seen him being used in the passing game as well. And let's assume for a second, and now with Zach Wilson under center, we don't know what we're going to get. I would actually, that might be kind of odd to say this, but I'd much rather see Mike White under center just because he was more apt to pass the running
or
backs.
Josh Johnson or Joe Flacco.
Literally any of those other guys than Zach
Jugs
Wilson.
Machine.
But let's assume let's use the assumption of rational coaching. Let's say that Saleh wants to get his rookie quarterback confident in a rhythm in his first game back, wants to at least have him use the short and intermediate areas of the field coming in. So that might be that he leans on guys like Ty Johnson, who is more capable out of the backfield than somebody like Tevin Coleman, who I know I've seen some buzz about this week. So I do lean towards Ty Johnson in this matchup, especially against Houston. I mean, it can't get any worse than that. So at least in this one, I think I would lean towards him.
these dumpster diver games, the Texans, Jets, I think the Falcons, Jags are another one. Every year we get into this, Chris, where sometimes they're just bad games with bad play on both sides of the ball and a lot of utility. But every now and then they can turn into shootouts, or at the very least, the defense can say it's their turn to malfunction all day and the offenses. So you're really rolling the dice. But I like rolling the dice on Ty Johnson. And Stevenson's been impressive. And I would expect Patriots running backs to get 25 to 30 carries to a minimum. And remember, we've seen games where they all score a touchdown. But with Ty Johnson, I think you're already factoring in that Tevin Coleman's probably not going to be that effective. He's maybe not even going to stay healthy. I mean, it's Tevin Coleman. When was the last time we really cared about Tevin Coleman? So I don't think that he's an obstacle. I think, like you said, it's really Zach Wilson. What did he learn watching those quarterbacks make this offense functional when it was dysfunctional when he was the quarterback? And, we'll see. I think that Elijah Mitchell's in regardless, especially with Corey Davis likely out. Dan Matichero, I hope you got your name right, Dan. A couple of interesting questions here again that give us a chance to talk about some names. First, Stevenson, who we just talked about, so 0.5 PPR, or Dalton Hilliard. I keep doing that. My brain. It's because I'm down in Louisiana. Dontrell Hilliard.
There we
go. So
close.
So let's take that one first. Ramondre Stevenson or Dontrell Hilliard, who's not the running back the Titans plan on leaning on today, according to Rap Sheet. However, he is the running back they signed after they released Adrian Peterson, and Jeremy McNichols also not ready to come back from his concussion today.
I guess in this case, I would lean more towards Ramondre Stevenson just because we're looking at the team with the better matchup, the defense. If we're talking about just like the general correlations that we would typically look at. I mean, if everybody's looking to start the Patriots defense, then obviously that should correlate to the running games associated with that offense. Stevenson has been involved both as a pass catcher and even a solid runner too. What was it during their primetime game the week beforehand, seeing Stevenson, at least I'd say match Harris in terms of running talent. That we can get into who's the better runner. That's more of a Thursday night topic anyway. Ask Matt Waldman, I guess, who he thinks might be the better runner between the two. But no, I lean more towards Stevenson, but I can understand at a half-point PPR, Hilliard has been a serviceable pass catcher, and we can see them trying to use him in the same role that they might have tried to use Jeremy McNichols, Darrington Evans. And if we're already thinking about Tennessee being the team that's going to be having to play from behind and not having a decent amount of pass catchers to use anyway, then that might be Hilliard that they lean on. But he hasn't been with the team too very long. I mean, we don't even understand, we don't know what their game plan is going to be coming into this. So it's just harder for me to at least get behind playing him over a guy like Stevenson, where we understand what his workload could be in this game.
That's a very fair way to put it. Stevenson's more of a known, and he's coming in playing really well. And there's just so many variables. Yeah. This is another one, Chris, if we map it out on the whiteboard and start drawing in, because here's the thing about Hilliard. Like you said, he's new to the team, but last week he got 60+% of the snaps. It was a game that they played from behind. Yeah. We expect them to play from behind. He caught 8 passes last week. And, well, he's probably going to be one of the prime pass catchers again. So, but on the other hand, if the Titans, every time we think we can rule this team out, every time we can say, okay, this team is not good on defense, or this team is not good on offense, or we think we have them pegged, Mike Vrabel, and he has beaten Belichick twice, Mike Vrabel rallies the troops, and somehow they summon up this great performance. So maybe Dante Foreman gets, like you said, a 60-yard touchdown and to get things going, and he has 25 carries. He's fresh. So Dontrell Hilliard could touch the ball 3 times today, or he could catch 15 passes and be the number 1 PPR running back of the week. Yeah. I mean, that's basically now, like you said, because it's 0.5 PPR, that gives Hilliard a little bit of appeal. If this was a PPR question, I would probably say Hilliard. And then folks out there, because everyone's struggling with running back decisions this week, Hilliard in PPR is a play that gives you a high ceiling, also low floor. But I think low floor that applies to running backs that we're saying automatically start, like Antonio Gibson or someone like that too. Okay, I want to ask you, because this one's close to home. It's Bengals Steelers ding rematch this week. We have not heard, I'm assuming it's T. Higgins and not Rashard Higgins. We have not heard much from T. Higgins, but we also have not heard much from Van Jefferson. So this is Dan's other question, 0.5 PPR. It gives us a chance to talk about these wide receivers that probably a lot of people are unsure about this week. Which one are we less unsure, more sure about, Higgins or Jefferson?
I know it might sound odd, and this might be my bias, but I still have to lean towards T. Higgins at this point. I know that the Steelers, what they're supposed to get, TJ Watt should be back.
Yep, Minka.
Minka Fitzpatrick is also supposed to be back as well. So defense, at least at like having their most of their personnel back. But if we're looking at things objectively, all right, second in targets behind Jamar Chase. Air yards have also been there over the last few weeks as well. I think he took a dip this past week with more of an Tyler Boyd being incorporated into the offense more. But this should also be a matchup where we think that Joe Burrow's going to have to lean on this passing game in order to keep up. I mean, Ben Roethlisberger, when pressed into games, even we saw last week against the Chargers, he can have at least a decently productive game for Ben Roethlisberger. So with the passing offense for the Steelers having to press them into a decent back and forth type of game, I can see T. Higgins getting involved. At least the metrics, the peripheral metrics have been there for T. Higgins, so I lean him in this case.
It could be interesting, Higgins down the stretch, if teams continue to take away Jamar Chase. And that becomes the option that Burrow really zeroes in on. And we'll see if it's him or Tyler Boyd, who, when Burrow was struggling last week, it was Tyler Boyd on third down especially. That win over the Raiders looking a little more impressive now, by the way. And certainly this week, Boyd did score a touchdown in the first matchup, but Higgins didn't play in the first matchup. So lots of ins, lots of outs, lots of what have yous. Let's just go back, and this is one where I think we're just dittoing Dr. Gene, but I want to make sure for folks out there, because Kent Lilly asked just a very basic question that Dr. Gene helped us with. If you have both of these San Francisco running backs, Elijah Mitchell or Jeff Wilson?
I think Elijah Mitchell, just because he offers the higher ceiling, I think, in this point. Now, would we be saying the same thing in this? I'm trying to remember the play correctly. What was it? The play in the red zone where they just had everybody lined up in different spots.
Garoppolo just missed him. Yeah.
Yeah, and Garoppolo just missed Jeff Wilson in the back of the end zone. Now, we might be having a completely different conversation if we're talking about Jeff Wilson as having that receiving touchdown, but at least we know that's in his bag. But I still lean more towards Elijah Mitchell just because he's been the more efficient runner so far. It's great to see that Jeff Wilson can get involved in the passing game. But if we're talking about just from a baseline perspective, who's going to get more touches out of that backfield? I'm leaning more towards Elijah Mitchell. If he's going to be active, he should be the starting running back. He'll be the one to get the majority of the touches, as we've seen so far, even before. Like when Jeff Wilson was active, Elijah Mitchell was also healthy.
Right.
Mitchell was the one getting the majority of the carries, so I lean more towards Mitchell.
Yeah, there's no clear answer here. I think that, and by the way, I didn't say this, but this is a different kind of week than usual because you already have 3 games in the books. So you already know where you stand. You have a better idea if you need to play for upside, if some players either underperformed on your side or overperformed on your opponent's side, or if you need to play it safe, right? I think that Jeff Wilson is probably a little bit safer than Mitchell this week. Like if you had a threshold of say 7 points or 8 points in a half PPR league, I think Wilson might be a little more likely to hit that. But if you say a threshold of say 15 points, Mitchell's more likely to hit that, right? Because like you said, Mitchell has the trust of the coaches. We know when both running backs are fully capable, they're going to play Mitchell over Wilson. That's not entirely true this week, but then again, the way Kyle Shanahan has handled this makes me think like as long as Mitchell's on the field, he's going to force feed him. So that's tough. Yeah. Oh, there she goes. See, this is what she does when she's like a model. She's petulant, She like if you don't give her the attention, then she's going to start doing things to distract you. Yeah, there she goes. All right. Austin Williams, and again, this is touching on some things that Dr. Gene helped us with, putting some punctuation marks on it as we're getting close to the punctuation for this show. Roll out a hobbled Patterson, or wait on AJ Dillon, hoping that Aaron Jones doesn't play.
Yeah, I think we lean more towards AJ Dillon.
Yes.
Even if Aaron Jones plays, listening to Dr. Gene, I think he confirms my bias, and that even if he's active, what do the Packers gain from putting Jones back into his original starting role with the bye week right there, their position in the NFC North? What do they stand to gain by doing that? So I lean more towards AJ Dillon with just the hope that the efficiency also matches the opportunity like we saw last week as well. Yeah,
I think, and this is one of those things where I'm maybe a little too informed by the experience of working with Dr. Gene for so long. But when he says, yes, Jones could play and get 10 to 15 touches, but I still think the more likely outcome here is that Jones doesn't play, or at least based on history and based on where the incentives and disincentives are. Like you said, what is there really to be gained? You have AJ Dillon so that you can roll him out there for 25, 28 carries. It's cold weather football time. And I think that's how Matt LaFleur wants to win anyway. So I think that as much as we'd like, and look, if it was a fully healthy Cordarrelle Patterson, it's a different question.
Yes.
That's the other variable here, is that Patterson is coming in not 100%. And again, it's one of these trash dumpster diver games. Atlanta and Jacksonville, I have no idea. The game could be 6-3. It could be 46-43. Well, it's the Jacksonville offense and Jamal Agnew's out. So
that might be a little
46-43. Maybe if they, Josh Allen can take the heavy lifting there. But the point is, these games, as we get to the point in the season where there's two teams that aren't playing for anything, it's very unpredictable. But it is predictable that AJ Dillon, when he gets the ball, is going to be like a bull in a china shop. What else is? We touch on a lot of these things. Let me see if there's anything else. I'm not going to go to specific. And thanks everybody, by the way. A great turnout again. And it's really heartening to see so many people. I mean, it's enjoyable to spend time with you all on Sunday, do our Sunday morning ritual. But I know it's later in the season, and we sometimes see our engagement numbers drop off as we get this deep in the season. Not happening on the Sunday morning show. Thanks, folks, for that. And if you can, subscribe, comment on the video, help us grow this YouTube channel. Y'all are essential to everything we do here. Let me get a temperature check. One running back we have not talked about today is Devontae Freeman, who last week was clearly ahead. He had a really good week last week for fantasy. Playing Cleveland this week. It looked like he's the guy with Latavius Murray in a more straight ahead secondary role. Do you trust that this week when you're weighing Freeman against all these part-time running backs?
I think so, especially not just with Freeman as a runner. I mean, looking shifty in his older age.
Yeah.
And I like that because they've got Cleveland. So they got Cleveland this week, and then they have to turn around and play them again in 2 weeks.
Right.
So we'll see whether the Ravens try and do some sort of, I don't know, they hide some of their offensive plays just because they'll see Cleveland again in a couple of weeks. That's just a whole other meta discussion for how the teams approach each other if they're division mates. But for Freeman, also seeing him used in the passing game as well, we're thinking about we already talked about Marquise Brown, whether or not his thigh injury is going to be a factor in this game. And we heard Dr. Gene's comments about him earlier. But with the rest of the pass catchers relatively healthy, Bateman, Andrews. I think actually Miles Boykin was dealing with an injury, but since he's one of the ancillary pass catchers, I'm not really all too concerned about him. But with Freeman being a part of both the passing and the rushing game, Latavius being more of a straight line runner. I mean, he has been involved as a receiver as well, but just not as efficient as a receiver as Freeman has been. So no, I would lean more towards Freeman this week because at least he should maintain that role moving forward. I mean, his role as a pass catcher. So I lean more towards him.
Yeah, he's like you said. I think he got 6 passes last week.
Yeah,
he got the goal. He got the big goal line carry and converted it. I just think that he's the guy right now. Like you said, he's looking spry. He's not looking the way he did when he was a street free agent bouncing around with the Giants last year. Maybe some of that is the Ravens offense. Last one I want to ask you about in this running back menagerie. I love the way you use ancillary, by the way. It's good. You make me feel not so self-conscious about how my brain keys up words sometimes that are what they call them SAT words, right? How many points on your SAT does it add if you play a Denver running back? Are you giving folks the nudge, playing the Chargers? You giving them the nudge? It is the Chargers, but it's also the Broncos who seem like they can figure out the running game for a week and then it goes away, like groundhog seeing its shadow and no spring. Are you more inclined to say take the plunge, play Javonte Williams, play Melvin Gordon over all these different names we've been talking about? There's not a lot of uncertainty there in the sense of their health or they're going to be in a 50-50 committee. There is uncertainty about how committed the Broncos are going to be to the run, how this offense is going to look coming out of the bye. What do we think about Denver's running backs?
No, I love both of them this week, which is, I know a lot of folks, whether they're in the dynasty community or just in the season-long community, that bought into this idea that it was going to be, Melvin Gordon to start the season, but then at some point Javonte Williams is going to take over, almost like, Melvin Gordon is just the stopgap, and then we're just going to kick him out after their bye week or whatever. And Melvin Gordon has played well this season. I guess I would love to hear Cecil's comments on
Right.
whether the
Very
rushing
good.
game, but still I'd think even with the Chargers, they've been more of a run funnel defense. I mean, look at the players on their secondary and how well that they've been playing so far, and with the way that Brandon Staley has kind of set up that defense, even from a meta perspective and wanting teams to rush the ball, so they're taking more time off the clock, using folks like Derwin James and the rest of their secondary to limit what you can do from a passing perspective. And you would think that would kind of play into the strengths of somebody like Teddy Bridgewater, who's really not going to be one of those guys to take one of those chances on the perimeter. But if you can work the interior part of the field, so guys like Javonte Williams, Melvin Gordon, who can catch passes out of the backfield, Noah Fant, Jerry Jeudy. I don't think we even talked about Jerry Jeudy from a wide receiver perspective earlier, but it's just those are the types of guys that could probably wind up being useful in this game. And for both those running backs, since they've been both efficient, they've been both useful in the passing game as well. If you've got either of them, I'd be starting them, either for Melvin Gordon and his penchant for vulturing a couple of touchdowns, for Javonte Williams and just his forced missed tackles, the rate that he has so far throughout the season. And both of them look great out of the backfield. So I have no problems with using either of them today.
Yeah, the Javonte Williams thing. And some of it is, Cecil said this from the beginning of the season, that Melvin Gordon looks faster. Melvin Gordon looked renewed, and he just wasn't going to go away. But it's coming with Javonte Williams, and maybe not this year, but eventually it's that wave. It's going to hit the shore. Maybe not this week, maybe not this year, but the matchup against the Chargers is a good one. On paper, the Chargers have actually firmed up against the run over the last month or so. Maybe it's been a point of emphasis. But then again, Denver ran on Dallas the same way the Michigan Wolverines ran on Ohio State. Sorry. Well, I guess you're not an Ohio State Hawk, are you?
No, I'm a Bearcat, not a Buckeye.
Are they going to get into the playoff?
They better. I mean, with their record so far, Cincinnati, with the way Cincinnati's been playing, they better get into the playoffs, or else I'm going to be upset.
My high school was the Bentworth Bearcats, and it was the only time I'd ever heard of the Bearcats outside of Cincinnati. And then when I was in high school, Charleroi, which was one of our rival schools just down I-70 right there on the shores of the Monongahela River, Daryl Harding, he was an all-world running back, and he ended up going to Cincinnati. Wow. So it was kind of cool to have that local connection. Always represent Whippy old Western Pennsylvania Interscholastic Athletic League, and hey, there's a lot of Pennsylvania, Western Pennsylvania, the cradle of football. But right now, again, Pittsburgh, Cincinnati showdown. Maybe Cincinnati steals that season series from Pittsburgh. A lot to look forward to today, especially in the late games. San Francisco, Minnesota, the Chargers and Denver. These are some games where a lot hang in the balance. And the way I like to put it, Chris, is these games can be stumbling blocks or springboards for these teams. As now the sprint is on. I don't know if anyone has enough left in them to sprint, but it's a mini season these last 6-7 weeks, and it's going to be pretty amazing as far as the swings. And maybe within these games, we're going to see swings, hopefully swings that help you get over the hump and win your fantasy matchups this week as we start to get closer to the playoffs. We're going to be there to help you. Thank you so much, folks. It's humbling to see so many of you take time out on your Sunday morning to spend with us, and that we can offer you something to help you get through your day and maybe win your matchup. As always, we appreciate the participation and help from Dr. Jene, the great Chris Allen, and I'm Sigmund Bloom, and Judy's not around right now, but I'm sure she'll come back for next Thursday night show or sometime during the week, folks. Thank you so much. We appreciate your support of Football Guys and being part of a community with you, because you're so